If you want to score 30 out of 30 in each section of the TOEFL test and avoid the most common traps set by the test makers, keep watching this video. We'll go through every part together, and I'll show you exactly what to expect on test day and how to get the highest score possible with the level of English you already have. My name is Anastasia. I scored 119 on the TOEFL test, and I have been helping students successfully pass it for more than 10 years. For each section, we'll begin with a few key tips you need to know to succeed. Then we'll practice that part together so you'll be fully prepared for the real test. If you already know the tips, feel free to skip ahead to the practice section. I've designed this video so that even if you have limited time to prepare, you won't need to do any extra studying on your own. You'll be ready to take the test tomorrow. Don't forget to share your test date and target score with me in the comments. And let's get started. Top 10 tips for acing the TOEFL reading section. Let's get started. First, let's look at the structure of the TOEFL reading section. It consists of only 2 passages, each about 700 words long, and you have 10 questions after each passage. You'll have about 35 minutes to complete this section, which means you'll have about 17 minutes for each passage. This brings us to the first tip. Don't read the entire passage. Just dive right into the questions. I know this may seem like an obvious tip, but I often see videos and articles that tell you to read the passage first. There is nothing wrong with that, but you have to be a very fast reader. Otherwise, you will lose time that could have been spent answering the questions. So, start by reading the title of the passage to get the main idea, and then move on to the first question. Look at the example. You have a passage about ancient coastlines. The first question is a vocabulary question. You need to find a synonym for the word crucial. The correct answer is important. As you can see, if you know the word crucial, you will answer this question in a few seconds and move on to question 2. You don't need to read the whole paragraph to find the correct answer. Tip number 2, improve your vocabulary. As you saw in the previous example, knowing the meaning of the word makes things a lot easier. The TOEFL reading section is not only a reading test, it's also a vocabulary test. So, to improve your reading score, you should work on expanding your vocabulary. Not only will this help you answer vocabulary-based questions more effectively, but it will also help you understand passages better. Many students claim to have problems with their reading skills, but after they do a few practice tests, it turns out that their vocabulary is limited. This prevents them from scoring well in the section. For example, if you don't know the word resurgence, you might have a hard time finding the right answer because it's not so easy to guess from the context. However, if you know that resurgence means something begins to grow, develop, or become successful again, and you know synonyms for it, such as renewal, revival, and comeback, you will find answer B in no time. This brings me to tip number 3. Practice active reading. One of the most effective ways to expand your vocabulary, especially when it comes to academic vocabulary, is to read actively. There are 2 types of reading you can do. Passive reading is when you just read something for pleasure. This is usually what we recommend for elementary language learners because they need to learn to understand the main idea of the text. However, at the advanced level, active reading becomes crucial. You need to underline words you don't know, look up their definitions, write down lists of synonyms, and think of sample sentences with these words to help you remember them. Remember that TOEFL is an academic test, so it's common to receive texts on physics, astronomy, marketing, sociology, music, art, or geology. So the sooner you start doing active reading on these topics, the better. Tip number 4, master skimming, scanning, and close reading. While one part of your success on the TOEFL reading section is a large vocabulary, the second part involves these 3 reading skills. Skimming means moving quickly through a paragraph or a passage. without reading every word to get the main idea or structure of the text. This is something we would do when reading news online. Scanning means looking for the right part of the text to read. For example, you have a question about seagrasses. This means that you need to find this word in the paragraph. So, scanning would involve looking for that word, identify the right sentence, and then reading carefully to find the answer. You will need this technique for many types of questions, such as factual information and negative factual information questions. However, the most important reading skill is what we call close reading. Many students forget this and only skim and scan, which often results in low scores. For example, take a look at this type of question. It's called a sentence simplification question. To answer this question, you have to read the given sentence carefully, break it down into several main ideas, understand its meaning, and then find a sentence that has essentially the same meaning. You will never be able to answer it correctly if you just look for the keywords. Tip number 5, focus on keywords and synonyms. It's important to pay close attention to keywords because many question types in the TOEFL reading section require you to identify them. In order to find the correct answers quickly, you need to look for keywords in the questions themselves, in the answer choices, and in the passage. This will also help you save time and get through the questions more quickly. You should also be aware of the importance of synonyms and paraphrases in the TOEFL reading section. Some names, such as seagrass, are unlikely to change, while if your keywords are words like impact, decline, or importance, you should expect their synonyms or paraphrases. Tip number 6, time management. You have a limited amount of time to complete the entire section, so use your time wisely. Don't spend too much time on any one question. If you're not sure, mark it and come back to it later. Unlike the listening section, you can navigate freely between questions in this section. So if you skip a question or two, you can always come back to it later. As you practice, time yourself and see how much time you spend on each question. Tip number 7, guess the meaning of words from context. No matter how good a reader you are or how many words you know, you will always encounter some words that are new to you, and that's okay. The reading section tests your understanding of academic texts and articles, so it's natural that even native speakers won't know all of these words. When you read a text about astrophysics in your native language, you will also see some words you don't know, and that's okay. So don't panic if you don't know some words, or even many of them. Instead, focus on the words you do know and try to guess the meaning of other words from context. Tip number 8, familiarize yourself with the question types. Becoming familiar with the different types of questions will save you time and will also help you approach each question strategically. You will not need to read the instructions for each question, and you can spend this time on finding the right answer. So, after taking a few full-length reading practice tests, go through all the question types and learn the strategies for each one. This is what we teach you in our TOEFL course. We go through the question types, discuss the strategies, and then analyze a complete reading section together so you learn how to apply these strategies on the real TOEFL test. This will help you feel confident on the day of the test. You will also learn the templates for high-scoring answers on the speaking and writing sections, important vocabulary for the listening section, and tips and tricks to improve your timing during the test. The link to the course is below. If you need help with your TOEFL preparation, click and join our TOEFL community. Tip number 9, practice with a variety of tests. It is obvious that the best practice tests are the official ones you will find on the ETS website. They are created by professionals and are the closest you can get to the real TOEFL test. However, if you have done them all and still need practice tests, you should choose a few different platforms to use in your preparation. Taking tests on only one platform may either make the preparation too easy for you or make the TOEFL test seem too challenging. So be sure to combine different resources to best prepare for the test. Finally, tip number 10. Review and learn from your mistakes. After each practice test, analyze your answers. Understand why you got certain questions wrong and learn from your mistakes. This self-reflection is the key to continuous improvement. Today we're going to work through a TOEFL reading passage together, step by step. I'll guide you through each part, just like I would if we were sitting side by side. If the reading section feels difficult, or if this passage seems a bit too much at first glance, don't worry. We'll take it slowly, look closely at each question, and break things down in a clear and simple way. I think you'll see that it's not as hard as it seems once we walk through it together. Let's get started. Question 1. It says, the word remnants in the passage is closest in meaning to. So this is a vocabulary question. We have to choose the word that means the same as remnants. Let's read the sentence in the text where this word appears. Many aspects of the modern flora and fauna were present on both sides of the Bering Sea as remnants of the Ice Age landscape. Now think, what does remnants mean in this sentence? The sentence says that flora, which means plants, and fauna, which means animals, found on both sides of the sea were from the Ice Age. So this word, remnants, refers to what remained from that earlier time. That means that the best choice is remains. Good job, let's move on. Question 2, it says, according to paragraph 3, all of the following are true except. This is a negative factual information question. That means 3 statements will be true and 1 will be false. So we have to find the false one. To answer this type of question, we first find the important keywords in the statements. Then we'll look for those words or similar ideas in the passage to see if the statement is true or false. Paragraph 3 tells us what Beringia was like, and while scanning through it, we find that it had glaciated mountains. It has sparse vegetation, which means little vegetation. It had less moisture than now, which means it was drier than it is today. And it supported herds of now extinct species. This means there were animals that are now extinct or dead. Now let's look at the answer choices again. They are all correct except for 1. The mammal species there all survived into modern versions. Is this true? No. These species went extinct, which means that they did not survive into modern versions. So this sentence is not true, which makes it the correct answer. Now let's look at question 3. What is the purpose of paragraph 3? This is a rhetorical purpose question. We need to understand why the writer included this paragraph. Let's quickly look at paragraph 3. What does it do? It describes what Beringia looked like and the animals that lived there. So the writer is not contrasting the Beringian landscape with other landscapes, not explaining why many animals became extinct, and not summarizing the information about Beringia that historians agree on. The author of this text is simply describing the place during the last ice age. So, the correct answer is describe the Beringian landscape during the last ice age. Good work! By the way, if you're already familiar with the question types and strategies, but your score still isn't where you want it to be, maybe it's time for something more focused. In our intensive TOEFL course, we walk through complete reading sections together, not just casually, but with real precision. Think of it as moving from I get it to I've mastered it. You'll also receive 1 month of complimentary access to our mobile practice app. It's filled with full-length TOEFL-style tests. And yes, it includes speaking and writing tasks evaluated by AI. And just to make things a little easier, course members receive a 5% discount on the TOEFL exam with an exclusive promo code. You'll find the link below. We'd love to have you with us. Question 4. Okay, now we have a sentence simplification question. We're given a sentence from the text, and we have to choose the one that has the same meaning. Let's look at the sentence in the passage. The presence of mammal species that require grassland vegetation has led Arctic biologist Dale Guthrie to argue that while cold and dry, there must have been broad areas of dense vegetation to support herds of mammoth, horse, and bison. Wow, that's a long sentence. Let's break it down. First, some animals needed grass. Second, Guthrie said that if these animals had lived in Beringia, then grass must have been there, even if it was cold and dry. Now, let's find the option that says that clearly. The best one is, Dale Guthrie argued that Beringia, though cold and dry, must have had enough dense vegetation to support the herds of mammoth, horse, and bison that live there. It mentions animals that need grass and what Guthrie said about Beringia. Well done. Now let's do question 5. It says, according to paragraph 4, Guthrie believes that the teeth of Ice Age fauna support which of the following conclusions? Let's simplify it. During the Ice Age, animals had specific types of teeth. What does this fact tell us? Remember, fauna means animals. Let's go back to paragraph 4. It says, nearly all of the Ice Age fauna had teeth that indicate an adaptation to grasses and sedges. They could not have been supported by a modern flora of mosses and lichens. Simply put, this means that the animals had teeth for grasses and sedges, not for moss or lichens. By the way, sedges look like this, moss looks like this, and lichens look like this. So the animals' teeth were made for eating grass, not moss. If their teeth were made for eating grass, what does that tell us? It tells us there was grass. And grass grows in grasslands, right? So the correct answer is grasslands were part of the Beringian landscape. Great. Let's move on to question 6. This one says, according to paragraph 5, how did Dale Guthrie use the information about radiocarbon analysis of bones from Beringian deposits? This is a factual information question. Simply put, we have to answer this question. How did Guthrie use the radiocarbon analysis of bones? In the text, we read, in contrast, Paul Colinvaux has offered a counter-argument. That means he disagreed with Guthrie. What did he say? He found out that the Beringian landscape during the peak of the last glaciation was more likely a polar desert with little or only sparse vegetation. So, according to Colinvaux, it was impossible that this region could have supported large herds of mammals and human hunters. Guthrie has argued against this view. Again, we understand that he disagreed with Colinvaux. Why? He said that radiocarbon analysis of mammoth, horse, and bison bones from Beringian deposits revealed that the bones date to the period of most intense glaciation. What does that mean? It means that the bones were found during the coldest time. Let's sum it up. Colinvaux said that there was not enough food for animals, so they couldn't live in Beringia. But bones show the animals were really there at that time. That means Colinvaux is probably wrong. So the correct answer is to show that the conclusions that Colinvaux drew from the analysis of pollen in Ice Age lake sediments cannot be correct. Excellent. Question 7. This is another vocabulary question. It says, the word plausible is closest in meaning to. Let's read the sentence with it in the text. A mixture of continuous but thin vegetation supporting herds of large mammals is one that seems plausible and realistic with the available data. The author is saying, this idea makes sense, it is possible and reasonable. So the correct answer is reasonable. Nice job. Question 8. Which of the following best describes the organization of paragraph 6? Let's think about how paragraph 6 is organized. It says, the arguments seem to be at a standstill until a number of recent studies resulted in a spectacular suite of new finds. This means that some new information appeared. To be at a standstill means that nothing is changing. Finds means findings, something that people found out. So nothing was changing until some new information was found out. Then a long explanation follows of what was found out. And after, we spot these words, as was predicted by Guthrie. We don't even have to read about what was found out as long as we understand it was something that proved Guthrie right. And then I see the word but, which means that there will be some contrast now. And indeed, there are more findings, but this time they prove Cullenvaux's theory. Look, it says, a finding supporting some of the arguments of Cullenvaux. So both scientists were partially correct. Let's sum it up. Some new information was found, which partly proved Guthrie's theory and partly Cullenvaux's theory. Which answer says that? Of course, the one saying new information is presented, and the information is used to show that the two competing explanations can each be seen as correct in some way. As you can see, it wasn't hard at all, and we didn't even have to read the entire paragraph and understand every single complicated word. Now, let's move on to question 9. Now we have to choose the best place to add this sentence. Nevertheless, large animals managed to survive in Beringia. This is the insert text question. To solve it, we simply need to find some clues that will help us find the best place for this sentence in the paragraph. The clues are nevertheless and animals. Nevertheless means contrast. So there has to be some contrast between this sentence and the one before it. And the word animals show that there should be some reference to animals in the sentence after this one. The first two sentences in the paragraph describe landscape. But in the third one, I can see examples of now extinct animals. So, I'll give the second square a try and insert my sentence there. It fits perfectly. Look, in the sentence before the highlighted one, they say that the landmass was forbidding. It means that it looked harsh, empty, or difficult to live in. A cold and windy place is often described as forbidding. It's hard to live there. And then, nevertheless comes, and the writer says that large animals managed to survive. It makes sense. Even though the place was difficult to live in, some animals still managed to do it. And the sentence after the highlighted one gives examples of the animals that managed to survive. Easy, right? The correct answer is square 2. If you have extra time on the exam, you can also check the other 2 squares, but if not, you can already move on to the last question. Question 10, the infamous prose summary question, and one of my favorites. You need to choose 3 correct ideas out of 6 to form a good summary. To answer this type of question, you need to choose the sentences that express the main ideas, not minor details. You should also avoid any sentence that gives incorrect information. How do you know you've picked the right one? Well, it should reflect the main idea of at least one paragraph. You can double check yourself by asking, do I remember this being discussed? In fact, by the time you reach this question, you've already read most of the text. So if a sentence truly contains a main idea, you should at least vaguely remember seeing it while answering the earlier questions. Here are the options I picked. Strong evidence indicates that large mammals, like mammoth and bison, survived in the harsh Ice Age Beringian landscape. Do you remember reading about it? Of course. So this will be my first choice. Analyses of Ice Age sediments uncovered very small amounts of pollen, suggesting that Beringia lacked the quantity of vegetation needed to support large herds of mammals. This is what Colin Vaux argued for. It's one of the key ideas in the text, and as a result, my second choice. Recent discoveries suggest that shallow-rooted plants created a fairly continuous cover over Ice Age Beringia, though the cover most likely was variable and uncertain in any one location. Remember the recent discoveries mentioned in the last paragraph? That's why we chose this answer. Well, that was the end of this part of the reading section. Here are 10 essential tips to help you excel on TOEFL listening. Tip number 1, familiarize yourself with the format. When I say familiarize yourself with the format, I don't just mean the general structure. We all know that you're going to hear 2 conversations and 3 lectures, that you're going to have 5 questions for each conversation and 6 questions for each lecture. What I mean is that you need to truly understand how each lecture or conversation is organized. You need to know what to expect, what questions will be asked, what the purpose of those questions is, what skills will be tested, and so on. How can you achieve that? Through practice and analysis. Don't just go from section to section. Instead, take time to stop, think about the question, think about the structure of the recording, and analyze your mistakes. Once you've analyzed at least 10 lectures and conversations, you'll see huge improvements. After having listened to tons of lectures and conversations, I can now pretty much guess the questions that will follow while still listening. Tip number 2, take notes to stay focused. In the previous video on listening, I mentioned the importance of taking notes, but I often get questions about how to do it, what to include, and whether notes are necessary. Taking notes is a must, but how you do it is very subjective. So far, I've seen 2 types of students. Some write down a lot of information, myself included. Others prefer less because more distracts them. Keep in mind that not taking notes at all is not a good option. Why not? Unless you have phenomenal memory, it's difficult to remember all the details of, let's say, a long academic lecture on geology. Notes help you stay focused and capture important details that can make all the difference when answering questions. Yes, you may understand almost everything or remember a lot, but when you have detailed questions or are asked about tiny details, it's better to have your notes to help you. For example, after a lecture on geology, you might be asked to put the steps of the basal sliding process in the correct order. Or see a question, what factors are involved in the amount of deformation a glacier undergoes? As you can see, it's difficult to remember the answers to these questions, along with a lot of other information if you don't take notes. And remember, the first and most important reason to take notes is to avoid distractions. When you write, you're focused on the lecture, whereas if you don't, your mind might start to wander by the 2nd or 3rd minute. So yes, notes are important. And yes, you should write a lot. But how much is a lot in your particular case is something you should decide for yourself. If you feel that notes are starting to distract you, cut them down a bit. Tip number 3, work on writing speed. This tip ties in with the previous one. If you find note-taking distracting, it may be because you are a slow writer. In that case, practice speed writing. Note that I'm talking about speed writing, not speed typing. There is a lot of advice online on how to improve this. Some basic tips are to hold your pen comfortably, keep letters small, tall, and thin, and maintain good posture. Also, check out the arm movement method. It's a game changer when done right. Believe it or not, your listening score can depend on your handwriting speed, so it's worth preparing in advance. Tip number 4, recognize main ideas versus details. The lectures are designed to overwhelm you with information, but you don't need to memorize every single thing. This is why I told you in the first tip to really get to know the listening section. Knowing what questions are likely to come up will make it easier to filter out what's important. Remember that even though the TOEFL listening section tests your understanding of specific points, it doesn't go into too much detail. So don't expect questions like, what year did this event take place? Tip number 5. Pay attention to tone and attitude. Tone and attitude are important in understanding the speaker's intent, so always pay attention to how the speakers are feeling, whether they're excited, skeptical, sad, frustrated, and so on. I sometimes add these emotions to my notes by writing S for student, frustrated, or P for professor, excited. Also, practice identifying attitudes from subtle cues in speech. This is important because you'll often be asked, why does the professor say this? And then a short part of the recording with the phrase will be played. This is where subtle cues in speech become crucial. Tip number 6. Eliminate wrong answers on tough questions. As with the reading section, if you're unsure of the answer, start by eliminating choices that are too broad, too specific, or irrelevant. For example, if a question asks, why does the professor say this? And one choice says, the professor thinks the student's idea is stupid. That's definitely wrong. TOEFL would never make such an answer the correct one. So elimination helps you narrow down your options and find the right answer. Tip number 7. Get used to spoken contractions. One of the reasons you often understand transcripts, but don't catch all the details in lectures and conversations, is that native speakers don't speak like this. We met in our house. Instead, they might say, we met in our house. We met in our house. As you can see, that's a little different. Contractions like could've or would've are common in conversations and lectures on the TOEFL test. Recognizing them will make it easier to follow the flow of natural speech. Also, if you're familiar with contractions, your brain doesn't have to work as hard to process the speech. For example, if you immediately recognize there as they are, you can focus more on understanding the overall meaning instead of mentally expanding each contraction. Tip number 8. Study campus vocabulary. This is a must. In my one-on-one lessons, I always teach campus-related vocabulary because it's so helpful for understanding conversations. If you don't know words like major, residence halls, dorms, bunk beds, electives, transfer, credits, and so on, it will be difficult for you to follow campus conversations and even some lectures. So make sure you study this vocabulary and you'll see how quickly your score will change. This is what we do in our TOEFL course. We'll teach you all the important vocabulary you need to know, such as campus-related vocabulary, academic vocabulary, subjects like biology, archaeology, art, physics, and more. Discuss the types of listening questions and what to expect from each of them, and dissect a complete listening section so that you know what to include and what not to include in your notes to feel prepared and confident on test day. We'll also teach you high-scoring templates for speaking and writing, and make sure you get the score you want in the shortest time possible. I'm leaving the link below. Click on it to join our TOEFL community. Tip number 9. Listen to different accents. While the American accent is the most common, the TOEFL test may include speakers with British, Australian, or other accents. Check out what they say on the ETS website. The listening section includes native speaker English accents from North America, the UK, New Zealand, or Australia to better reflect the variety of accents you might encounter while studying abroad. You may not hear these accents every day, so find YouTube videos with different accents to familiarize yourself and avoid confusion. Tip number 10. Stay calm during long lectures. I usually have at least 5 one-on-one sessions a day, and most of them are TOEFL related. I've seen hundreds of students, and there are real problems. And believe me, in 60 or even 70% of the cases, a lot of their problems are related to their personal psychology and test anxiety. Once these two issues are resolved, their scores increase dramatically. The lectures in the listening section are deliberately long to test your concentration. As a result, many students panic and miss important points. You should never worry about missing a detail or two. always focus on the main idea and stay calm throughout. Today we're going to work through a full TOEFL listening section together to see how prepared you are for this part of the exam. Keep track of how many questions you answer correctly. And don't forget to share your results in the comments. As usual, we'll go through 3 lectures and 2 conversations. After each question, I'll pause the video to give you some time to answer. And then I'll reveal the correct response. This won't happen on test day, but it's a great way to practice and review any mistakes right away. We'll also cover some key vocabulary from the lectures and conversations. So grab a pen or a pencil and let's dive in.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a university employee at the campus employment office.
Hi, can I help you?
I hope so. My name's Mark Whitman.
Don't I remember you from last year? You worked in, where was it? The art library?
Yeah, well, you're good. That was me, and I really enjoyed the work.
Right, yeah, your supervisor gave us some really great feedback at the end of the year. Oh, he's so organized, always on time, helpful.
Really? Well, I'm glad. It was a good job.
Well, we usually try to match students' jobs with their academic interests.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what career I'm headed for, but librarian is a possibility. It was a great experience to learn how it works and meet some people working in the field. But for this year, well, that's what I wanted to ask about.
Oh, how come you waited so long to come in? You know how fast campus jobs fill up. If you'd come in earlier, you could probably have gotten the library job again. I mean, since you have the experience from last year, you don't need the training and all. But it's been filled now.
Yeah, I know. But I'd planned to get a job working at a restaurant off campus this year. I really need to make more money than I did last year, and working as a waiter, there's always the tips. But I've tried a ton of places, and I haven't found anything. I know it's really late, but, well, I was wondering if maybe there was some job that hadn't been taken, or maybe someone started a job and, had to drop it or something.
Well, I doubt you'll find anything.
Could you possibly check? I know it's a long shot, but my friend Suzanne, she takes photography classes in Harrison Hall, and she sort of thought there might be an opening in the janitorial staff.
Why does your friend, the photography student, think she has information about a janitorial staff opening? I'm pretty sure those jobs are filled. In fact, I remember taking lots of applications for them. But let me double-check it online.
She said the whole studio arts building, and especially the photo lab, have been kind of, sort of messy lately. I mean, she says there's, chemicals and stuff left out, and, it's like no one's been cleaning up. Oh, but that could just be, students using the lab after hours or something, like after it's been cleaned.
Hang on. There is an asterisk next to one of the job numbers here. There's a note. Let's see. Your friend's right. Seems like one of the student janitors quit a couple of weeks ago for some reason. Well, whatever. It looks like this is your lucky day.
Wow, that is so great. So, who's the contact person?
Check with the janitorial office.
Fine. Thanks so much.
Why does the student go to the employment office?
The correct answer is C. The student goes to the employment office to find out about getting an on-campus job. He already got great feedback from his supervisor at the end of the year, so he doesn't need any more feedback.
Why does the university employee seem surprised at the student's request for on-campus jobs?
The correct answer is B. The woman is surprised at the student's request because she expected him to apply earlier in the semester. She says jobs on campus fill up very quickly, and the library job that a student had last year has already been filled.
What does the student imply about the job he had at the library last year?
The correct answer is B. It did not pay as well as jobs in restaurants. The student said he needed to make more money this year. And since waiters get tips, he wanted to get a job off campus in a restaurant. This means that his previous job at the library didn't pay very well.
Why does the student mention his friend Suzanne?
D is correct, to explain why he thinks there is a job opening. The student mentions that his friend, Suzanne, takes photography classes in Harrison Hall, and she told him that there might be an opening in the janitorial staff.
What can be inferred about the woman when she says this?
Why does your friend, the photography student, think she has information about a janitorial staff opening?
The correct answer is C. She doubts the accuracy of the information. The woman is skeptical that a photography student would know about a janitorial staff opening. Well, that wraps up part 1. Here is some useful vocabulary we came across in this conversation. Janitor. A janitor is a person employed to take care of a large building, such as a school or college. He or she deals with the cleaning, repairs, and so on. Janitorial. Janitorial means relating to the job of being a janitor. In the conversation, the woman said janitorial staff, which is a more formal way of saying janitors, to fill up. To fill up means to become full. Campus jobs fill up very fast. A long shot. A long shot is something you try, even though it's unlikely to be successful. I know it's a long shot, but my friend Suzanne thought there might be an opening in the janitorial staff. Let's move on to the next part where you'll listen to a lecture.
Listen to part of a lecture in an earth science class. The class has been discussing volcanoes.
Okay, we know the Earth's surface, the crust, is made up of tectonic plates and that these huge slabs of rocky crust are slowly sliding over or under or past each other. And we said that most of the world's volcanoes occur at the boundaries of these tectonic plates, where you have hot molten rock squeezing up through gaps between the plates. But some volcanoes occur not at the edges, but in the middle of a continental or oceanic plate. The Hawaiian Islands, for example, are thousands of kilometers away from any plate boundary, and yet you have vast amounts of magma, molten rock or lava, flowing up through the Earth's crust, which means, of course, that volcanic activity there can't be explained simply by plate tectonics. So, how do we explain these volcanic anomalies these exceptions to the general rule? Well, back in 1963, a geophysicist by the name of Wilson came up with a hot spot theory to explain how this particular type of volcanic activity can occur, and can go on for maybe tens or even hundreds of millions of years. Wilson's theory was that hotspots exist below tectonic plates, and they're the cause of these volcanoes. But what causes the hotspots? Well, the most popular theory that's been proposed is the plume hypothesis. According to this hypothesis, plumes, basically columns of extremely hot magma. These plumes well up from deep inside the planet's interior, maybe even as deep as its core, and rise all the way up to melt through the Earth's crust. Imagine a burning candle, and imagine moving a sheet of heavy paper slowly over the flame of the candle. You're going to get a series of burn spots in the paper. Well, that's just like what's happening with the Hawaiian Islands, but instead of a sheet of paper, you've got a tectonic plate, and it's moving over this plume of intensely hot magma, and rather than a series of burn spots in the paper, you're getting a chain of volcanic islands where the hot plume melts through the crust under the Pacific Ocean at one point after another, with active volcanoes on the younger islands that are now just above the plume. And the other islands, well, the farther away from the plume they are now, the older they are, and the longer ago their volcanoes went dormant or extinct. Incidentally, volcanic islands may seem small, but the island known as the Big Island of Hawaii is one of the tallest topographic features on the planet, more than 5 kilometers from the seafloor to the ocean surface, and almost that much again, up to its highest peak. That's nearly 10 kilometers from ocean floor to the highest point on the island, which makes it taller even than Mount Everest. So, you can imagine the huge amounts of magma or lava that have flowed up to form even just this one island, much less the whole chain of islands. Now, the plume hypothesis provides a pretty elegant explanation for a volcanic anomaly like the Hawaiian Islands, but while it's hypothetically attractive, there's very little direct evidence to support the theory because, so far, no one's been able to actually observe what's happening that far beneath the Earth's crust. Some studies have been done, seismographic, geochemical, where the data's consistent with the model, but they aren't definitive proof. Even the model supporters aren't comfortable claiming that it explains every volcanic anomaly, and, like any popular theory, I suppose, it has some determined critics. These critics have put forth a number of alternative theories, all unproven so far, but one well-regarded theory is the crack hypothesis, which assumes that hot spots are created when a piece of the crust gets stretched thinner and thinner, and the resulting stress causes small cracks to open up at weak spots in the crust. And it's through these cracks that magma pushes up to form volcanoes. Proponents of the crack hypothesis consider this a widespread phenomenon, and believe that magma's not coming up from deep within the Earth's interior, but rather from just beneath the surface crust. This hypothesis is attractive because it fits with what we already know about plate tectonics, and it fits what we know about some secondary smaller hotspots. But how well does it explain the Hawaiian Islands? Could a series of random cracks produce that same particular string of islands, that sequence so neatly from old to young? You know, it worries me when a theory depends on coincidence to produce results.
What is the lecture mainly about?
The correct answer is C. Explanations for why volcanoes occur in some locations. At the beginning of the lecture, the professor says that we know what tectonic plates are. and that most volcanoes occur at the boundaries of the tectonic plates. But some volcanoes do not. They occur in the middle of the tectonic plates. Then the professor asks, so how do we explain these volcanic anomalies, these exceptions to the general rule? This tells us that the lecture will be about the reasons why volcanoes occur in the middle of the tectonic plates.
According to the professor, why was the hotspot theory originally proposed?
A is correct. To explain prolonged volcanic activity far from plate boundaries, the professor says that in 1963, a geophysicist, Wilson, came up with a hotspot theory to explain how this particular type of volcanic activity can occur. By this particular type of volcanic activity, he means volcanic eruptions that occur in the middle of a tectonic plate, far from plate boundaries.
Why does the professor describe moving a sheet of heavy paper over a candle?
The correct answer is C. To illustrate one hypothesis for the way some volcanic anomalies are formed. This hypothesis is the plume hypothesis. The professor first introduced it, then explained what plumes are, and then began to explain how they work. That's when he used the example of paper and a candle.
Why does the professor discuss how high one of the Hawaiian Islands rises above the ocean floor?
D is correct. To emphasize that hotspot volcanoes can produce large amounts of magma. The professor says that's nearly 10 kilometers from the ocean floor to the highest point on the island. And then, he says, so you can imagine the huge amounts of magma or lava that have flowed up to form even just this one island.
According to the crack hypothesis, what causes a hotspot?
D is correct. Hot magma flows up at the point where a tectonic plate has been stretched thin. The professor says that according to the crack hypothesis, hotspots are created when a piece of the crust gets stretched thinner and thinner. As a result, small cracks open up in the crust, and it's through these cracks that magma pushes up to form volcanoes.
What is the professor's opinion of the two main hypotheses he presents?
The correct answer is B. Each hypothesis accounts for some, but not all volcanic anomalies. The professor says that the plume hypothesis is attractive, but even its supporters are uncomfortable claiming that it explains every volcanic anomaly. He later says that the correct hypothesis is also attractive, but it doesn't explain the Hawaiian Islands. This means that neither theory explains all volcanic anomalies. This lecture and the following questions were quite challenging, right? But even so, it's possible to answer each question correctly, if you know how to take notes effectively. In fact, note-taking is one of the most important skills you need to develop in order to do well on the TOEFL listening section. But it's not easy. Some students don't take enough notes and miss key points that could have helped them answer the questions, while others try to write everything down and lose track of the main idea. If you want to master note-taking once and for all, join our TOEFL course. We'll not only do practice tests together, but we'll also break down lecture and conversation scripts to see what's worth writing down and what's not. I'll share essential strategies for the listening section that'll make answering questions much easier, and we'll cover important words, such as campus vocabulary, that you'll undoubtedly need in the listening, speaking, and even writing sections. If you're having trouble getting the score you need on the listening section or on the TOEFL overall, just click on the link below to sign up. Now, here is some essential vocabulary from the lecture that you may encounter on all TOEFL sections. The crust. The crust is the surface of the Earth. Tectonic plates. Tectonic plates are parts of the Earth's surface. Boundaries, edges. Boundaries or edges are the lines that mark the limit of something. Molten rock. Molten rock is hot liquid rock. There are two types of molten rock, magma and lava. Magma is hot liquid rock that is below the surface, and lava is hot liquid rock that is on the surface. Plumes. Plumes are columns of very hot magma. A dormant volcano. This is a volcano that isn't active right now. Think of it as sleeping. An extinct volcano, on the other hand, is one that is no longer active. Think of it as dead. I'm planning to make a separate video on this topic because, as you can see, there are just so many words to cover. So if you're interested, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss it when it comes out. Let's move on to the next section.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Hi, Professor. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about the class you're teaching next semester, the course on Polish drama. I was thinking of taking it.
Well, that's an upper division course. You don't look familiar to me. Are you a student in this department?
No, actually I'm not.
Okay. Have you had other classes in the Slavic languages department here or somewhere else?
No, that's the thing. I was just wondering how good my Polish would have to be, whether the class is taught in Polish or not.
Well, you'd have to have some knowledge of it. By that level, a lot of the students are quite fluent. Plus, there are some native speakers in the department. And we don't plan for it to happen, but it's pretty common for the discussions to kind of move in and out of English and Polish, and it can be difficult to follow. So, how well do you speak Polish?
Not so great. It's just that my father's from there, so I'm interested in learning about, Polish history, Polish culture. Plus, I'm studying drama. I'll probably major in it. I love plays, so I thought your course might be perfect.
To be honest with you, you have to realize that we'll be watching videos of performances and maybe, if we can swing it, even watch a live performance, and those won't necessarily be in translation. Also, texts are sometimes available in translation, but even then some references will be to the original. I'd hope you'd be fairly confident in reading.
To be honest, it sounds totally over my head.
You know what? I believe they'll be offering a survey course on Polish literature. Let me check here. Yes, I thought it was being offered this time. Professor Jaworski's teaching it. Let's see, it covers the major works, epic romantic poetry, the novels, And it does cover 1 or 2 plays.
And this is in English?
Yes, you'll be reading mostly English translations, and the discussions will be in English.
Novels and poetry.
They'll provide you with a great historical context for the plays, so when you do get to them, you're going to really have a feel for the times they lived in, so to speak. Plus, this course might also give you the impetus to learn more Polish. Get it to the level where you'd be ready for the other class.
What are the speakers mainly discussing?
B is correct. Whether the student should take an advanced course in Polish drama. This conversation was relatively easy, so I'll just give you the correct answers here.
According to the professor, what will students do in her class?
The correct answers are C and D. Use the Polish language in class discussions and watch recorded performances of Polish plays.
Why is the student interested in the professor's class?
The correct answers are A and D. He wants to learn about his family background, and the course is related to the student's intended course of study.
What does the professor think the student should do?
D is correct. Take a survey course in Polish literature before taking a Polish drama course.
What does the professor imply when she says this?
I'd hope you'd be fairly confident in reading.
C is correct. She is concerned that the student may not be able to read Polish. Vocabulary time. As I mentioned, this conversation was easy, so we only have 2 words worth noting. Over my head. Over my head means too hard for me to understand. Impetus. Impetus is a force that encourages a particular action. For example, plus, this course might also give you the impetus to learn more Polish. Time for the next lecture.
Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
Okay, today I'd like to spend some time going into more detail about symbiosis. Symbiosis, what is it? Anyone?
I thought it's when 2 organisms are in a relationship that they both benefit from. Well, at least that's what I thought it was until I did the reading last night. Now I'm kind of confused about it because the book used that definition to describe mutualism. Could you explain the difference?
Good. I was hoping that someone would bring that up. Sometimes scientists working in different fields use the term symbiosis to mean slightly different things, and it can get confusing. For example, when symbiosis is used as a synonym for mutualism. But there are quite a few of us out there who think there should be a clearer distinction made between the two. Okay, where to begin? The original definition of symbiosis is pretty simple. It simply means living together. So any close relationship between two organisms of different species would be considered a symbiotic relationship, including positive and negative relationships. Mutualism, then, is a kind of symbiosis, a specific type of symbiotic relationship where both organisms benefit somehow. So your book is correct. Now, I want to make it clear that the positive result from being in a mutualistic relationship doesn't have to be equal for both organisms. It's not a one-to-one ratio here. Is everyone with me so far? Symbiosis, general term. Mutualism, a narrower, more specific kind of symbiosis. Okay. Now, let's take a closer look at mutualistic relationships. I'll start off by describing a case of mutualism that involves a certain butterfly species found in South Africa and Australia. It's a good example of how dependence on a mutualistic relationship can vary. Okay, there's this butterfly family, and I'll spare you the fancy Latin name because it's not important for our purposes here. I'll call them coppers and blues. Well, because most members of this family have blue or copper-colored wings. I think this is one of the most interesting cases of mutualism. These butterflies require the presence of ants to complete their life cycle. Their interaction with ants is obligatory. So this is what happens. A female butterfly of these coppers and blues will lay eggs only on vegetation where there are ants of a particular species. The butterflies can smell. Ants leave behind pheromones, a special chemical signal. The butterfly recognizes the ant's pheromones on the plant. And then the newly hatched butterflies, the caterpillars, will feed on this plant after they hatch from the eggs. As the caterpillar gets a little older and finds shelter under nearby rocks or stones to protect itself from predators, it's always attended or escorted by ants. And it always makes its way back to the host plant to feed, guided by the ants, the ant escort service, so to speak. Now, why would the ants go through all this trouble? What's their benefit? Mary?
It's probably related to food.
You're onto something.
Okay, ants feed on sweet stuff, right? So the caterpillar must have some kind of special access to honey or sugars or something like that. Maybe caterpillars produce honey somehow. On second thought, I'm probably way off.
You're pretty close, actually. The caterpillars have a honey gland, an organ that secretes an amino acid and carbohydrate liquid. The caterpillar secretes the liquid from the honey gland, rather large quantities, enough to feed several ants. But what makes this relationship obligatory for the caterpillar? Well, if the ants don't feed regularly on the liquid from the caterpillar's honey gland, the gland overloads and gets infected. The infection will kill the caterpillar, and it'll never reach its final stage of development, becoming a butterfly. John?
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm following here. The caterpillar needs the ants, or it won't make it to the stage where it can become a butterfly. And the ants do this because they get an easy meal out of it, right? But the ants don't absolutely need the caterpillar for survival because they can get food from other places, right? So it's still called mutualism, even though it seems like the caterpillar's getting way more out of it. Oh, wait, you said they don't have to equally benefit. Never mind, sorry.
Yes, but there is a type of mutualism where the relationship is necessary for both organisms to survive. It's called obligatory mutualism, and we'll talk about that in the next class.
What is the professor mainly discussing?
The correct answer is B, a specific kind of symbiotic relationship between organisms. The professor said that mutualism is a type of symbiosis. More precisely, it's a specific type of symbiotic relationship in which both organisms benefit in some way. Then the professor said, "Now, let's take a closer look at mutualistic relationships." This means that in this lecture, the professor is going to discuss mutualistic relationships, which are specific kinds of symbiotic relationships between organisms. That's why answer B is correct.
What does the professor imply about the term symbiosis?
A is correct. It's often used with too narrow a meaning. The professor said that some scientists use the term symbiosis as a synonym for mutualism. But the term symbiosis is more general. It simply means living together. Mutualism, on the other hand, is a narrower term. It means living together and getting some benefit from it. Because scientists sometimes use the term symbiosis instead of mutualism, it's being used with too narrow a meaning, so answer A is correct.
How do the butterflies mentioned by the professor facilitate the relationship between caterpillars and ants of a certain species?
C is correct. The butterflies lay their eggs on plants where the ants are present. The professor said, a female butterfly of these coppers and blues will only lay eggs on vegetation, where there are ants of a particular species.
In the example the professor mentions, how do the ants benefit from their interaction with the caterpillars?
The correct answer is D. The caterpillars produce a liquid from a species gland to feed the ants. The professor mentioned that the caterpillars have honey glands. They secrete the liquid from these glands, and this liquid is enough to feed the ants.
What aspect of mutualism does the professor illustrate with the example of the caterpillars and the ants?
The correct answer is B. It's not necessary for both organisms to benefit equally from the relationship. Answer B is correct, because the caterpillars need the ants to survive, but the ants do not. They can get food from other places, so the caterpillars and the ants do not benefit equally.
What can be inferred about the student when she says this?
Maybe caterpillars produce honey somehow. On second thought, I'm probably way off.
D is correct. She doubts that her statement is correct. The student said, on second thought, I'm probably way off, which means I'm probably completely wrong. Let's review key vocabulary from this lecture. Caterpillars. Caterpillars are little animals that look like this. Way off. Way off means to be completely wrong or mistaken. I'm way off means I'm very wrong or far from being right. To hatch. To hatch means for baby animal to come out of an egg. Newly hatched butterflies are butterflies that have just come out of their cocoons. To escort. To escort someone means to go with them to make sure they're safe. To secrete. To secrete means to produce liquid, a gland. A gland is an organ that secretes or produces liquid chemicals. Now, let's listen to the next lecture.
Listen to part of a lecture in an American history class.
We've been talking about the transformation, the industrialization of the United States economy in the 19th century. As the country shifted from an agricultural to an industrial base, political power shifted too. Businesses became a lot of power went from the government into the hands of business leaders. So, why did this happen? How did an elite group, a few business giants, how did they end up dominating, controlling a number of important national industries in the last quarter of the 19th century? How did they get to be so dominant? How did they figure out? How did they take advantage of the new industrialization of American society? Well, consider the example of Andrew Carnegie and the steel industry. We've already discussed the development of a national network, a national system of railroads. Well, this growth created a tremendous demand for steel. A national railroad system needs a lot of railroad tracks, right? And Carnegie seized the opportunity. He built the world's most modern steel mill, and he came up with a system of business organization called vertical integration. Vertical integration just means that every single activity of a particular industry's processing is performed by a single company. In the case of the steel industry, this means the mining of iron ore, the transportation used to get ore from the mine to the mill, turning the ore into the steel, the manufacturing process, and sales. Carnegie controlled all of these. He practiced vertical integration on such a large scale that he practically owned the whole steel industry. This, of course, gave him a lot of political clout. Just a quick sketch, but you get the idea, right? Here's another example. John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller owned an oil refinery, but he wanted to expand his business. Since there was lots of competition in the industry, he thought the smart way to go about it would be to buy his competitors' businesses. But at the time, it was illegal for one corporation to control another. So what he did was, he created an organizational structure called a trust. A trust is, I don't have to go into that now. What matters is that a trust created a single, central management team, and that team directed the activities of what otherwise still appeared to be independent companies. This new legal entity worked so well that at one point Rockefeller controlled 90% of the country's oil refineries, which again gave him lots of political power. So you've got two different approaches to expanding a business, and both were quite effective. Of course, these weren't the only two examples. A number of big businesses run by powerful individuals developed across, a wide range of industries, like railroads, food processing, electricity. But what they all had in common was the government let them operate pretty much how they wanted to. So why did they do that? Why did the government keep such a low profile and allow individuals to gain so much control of the industries? Well, obviously they had the wealth and the power to influence political leaders. But also, the truth is that these industry leaders made a significant contribution. Their investments in technologies led to the development of many new production techniques, which strengthened the economy, and many of them gave lots of money to charity. Andrew Carnegie was particularly admired for his generosity. But there was one thing in particular that gave them power, and that's they were beneficiaries, probably the biggest beneficiaries of a theory, a dominant political theory in the 19th century, something called laissez-faire doctrine. Laissez-faire roughly means let it alone, and that pretty much summarized the theory's philosophy. The idea was that government should leave business alone, allow it to operate unregulated. Legislatures weren't supposed to pass a lot of laws or worry about regulating business practices. When people did challenge a company's business conduct, I mean in court cases, well, the few laws that did exist were usually interpreted in favor of business interests. But over time, it started becoming increasingly obvious and troubling to the public that some of these big companies simply had too much control. There were criticisms that owners had too much opportunity to exploit workers and consumers, because they could control prices and wages. And small business owners and small farmers couldn't compete. So there was bad press, bad publicity. Enough that the government eventually felt it had to do something. So it passed two key pieces of legislation. One law was designed to regulate the prices set by the railroads. Another made it illegal for trusts to be used to limit competition. Both were aimed squarely at reducing the exclusive control that existed in some industries.
What is the lecture mainly about?
C is correct. Reasons that business leaders gained political power in the late 19th century United States. The professor said, a lot of power went from the government into the hands of business leaders. And then asked, why did this happen? So it's clear that C is the correct answer.
Why does the professor discuss vertical integration?
The correct answer is A. To explain how Andrew Carnegie gained control of the steel industry. The professor mentioned Andrew Carnegie and the steel industry. He said that when the demand for steel increased, Carnegie built the most modern steel mill and came up with the idea of vertical integration, which allowed him to perform all the activities of the steel industry, and as a result, practically own the entire industry.
In what two ways did business leaders make a positive contribution to the United States in the 19th century?
The correct answers are A and D. They invested in new production technologies, and they supported charitable causes. In the lecture, the professor said that industry leaders made a significant contribution. Their investments in technologies led to the development of many new production techniques. And many of them gave lots of money to charity.
According to the professor, what is the main reason that some businesses were able to become powerful during the 19th century?
C is correct. The government did not impose many regulations on businesses. The professor said that one thing in particular that gave businesses power was the idea that the government should leave business alone and allow it to operate unregulated. As a result, legislators weren't supposed to pass a lot of laws or worry about regulating business practices.
Why did the government pass new laws aimed at businesses?
B is correct. To respond to complaints from the public. In the lecture, the professor said, but over time, it started becoming increasingly obvious and troubling to the public that some of these big companies simply had too much control. There were criticisms that owners had too much opportunity to exploit workers and consumers because they could control prices and wages. So there was bad press, bad publicity, enough that the government eventually felt it had to do something.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
A trust is, I don't have to go into that now. What matters is that a trust created a single, central management team, and that team directed the activities of what otherwise still appeared to be independent companies.
What does the professor imply about the term trust?
The correct answer is B. It's unnecessary to explain the details of the term. The professor said, a trust is? Well, I don't have to go into that now. So it's clear she didn't think she needed to explain what a trust is at that point in the lecture. The most important words from this lecture are to shift. To shift means to move. To seize the opportunity. To seize the opportunity is to use the opportunity. Iron ore. Iron ore is rock from which iron can be extracted. A mine. A mine is a pit in the earth from which minerals are extracted. A steel mill. A steel mill is a factory where steel is made. An oil refinery. An oil refinery is a factory that turns crude oil into usable petroleum products, such as diesel fuel, gasoline, and more. A beneficiary. A beneficiary is a person who receives money or benefits as a result of something else. A beneficiary of a theory is the person who benefits from that theory. A legislator. A legislator is someone who is responsible for making laws. One of the reasons why so many students struggle with the speaking section of the TOEFL is that, unlike the reading and listening sections, you cannot estimate your score for the section on your own. You need someone to listen to what you say, give you feedback, and tell you what you need to get a higher score. As part of the TOEFL prep course we created at LinguaTOEFL, I give consultations to students where I evaluate their speaking and writing responses. And what's interesting is that every single student I've had so far has repeated exactly the same mistakes, which usually results in them scoring 22 to 23 on the speaking section. And that's the typical score you're likely to get if you don't understand how the test works, regardless of your level of English. By the end of the consultation, however, most of these students scored 26 to 27, or even higher, while their speaking level has obviously not changed during those 30 to 40 minutes. So, what do you need to know to score 30 out of 30 on the day of the test? Tip number 1, study the speaking scoring rubrics. To get a high score, you need to know what the evaluators are looking for. So the best way to succeed in this section is to know exactly what to say and what not to say. For example, some test takers only think about their grammar and vocabulary and completely ignore what they're saying. Others, on the other hand, do their best to give 2 reasons in type 1 question and start stuttering or making mistakes in order to finish on time. There are also those who think that they should give a broad summary of the reading in questions type 2 and 3, or those who think they should not summarize the reading at all. In any case, all these people will never score higher than 23. Even if their speaking skills are very good, there are 3 main criteria you need to be aware of: delivery, language use, and topic development. You need to pass all 3, not just one. This is why I spend a lot of time both in the TOEFL prep course I created and in one-on-one sessions breaking down the speaking rubrics, so that my students have a checklist of things they absolutely need to get a high score. This brings us to tip number 2. Learn time management. The TOEFL speaking section is time sensitive, with only 4 questions to answer in 16 minutes. You have only 15 seconds to prepare for question 1 and 45 seconds to speak. And in those 45 seconds, you have to develop your opinion on a personal question and give reasons and examples for it. For example, you will be asked, do you agree or disagree with the statement that female and male university students should have separate residence halls? Now pause the video, give yourself 15 seconds to think about what to say, and try to give a detailed answer in 45 seconds, giving reasons and personal stories that would support your opinion. Not so easy, is it? So you need to practice managing your time effectively during your answers. Set a mental timer for each part of your answer so you don't get caught off guard. For example, your introductory sentence in question type 1 should be no longer than 5 seconds. Otherwise, you won't have time to go into detail. In type 2 and 3 questions, you have to read the text, then listen to a conversation and a lecture, and then summarize what you learned in 60 seconds. Again, you need to know that you should spend no more than 15 seconds summarizing the reading, and at least 40 seconds giving details from the listening. You cannot effectively stay within the time limit if you don't use templates. Small structures for all 4 of your responses will help you score well and organize your ideas clearly. So tip number 3, start the same way for each question type. Simplify your approach by using the same introductory phrase for each question type. This will reduce the stress of getting started and help you start with confidence. This is why we need effective templates. For example, let's say your question type 1 looks like this. Your degree requires that you should choose a history course. Which of the following courses would you prefer? Art history, 20th century world history, science history. You only have 15 seconds to think about what you're gonna say, so in order to start confidently, you need to have an idea of what you might say. Of course, you can try to improvise, or you can use a set phrase. I can say, If I had to choose, I would definitely opt for an art history course. This would show the examiner that I can use conditionals. If I had to choose, I would. That I know idiomatic vocabulary, opt for. And that I can successfully paraphrase the task instead of just reading it. Also, I won't freak out about what to say, because whenever I see a question like this, I already know what my introduction will be. It will also allow me to spend more time on my reasons and develop them better. Another example. In question type 2, you will usually read a campus announcement and then listen to a conversation between two students discussing the announcement. You have 30 seconds to prepare, which is not a lot. So, if there is a change being discussed, you can always start your answer by saying, "The reading passage announces a change on campus." And then go on to summarize the reading. Imagine, you're stressed about what to say next, but you can confidently start with a memorized sentence. This will help you sound confident in what you say, which is important on test day, and give you motivation to continue with the rest of your answer. As you can see, templates are critical. Does that mean you cannot score high without a template? No, you absolutely can. But templates make your life a lot easier, increase your score, and help you prepare for the exam faster. That is why we have included both speaking and writing templates in our TOEFL prep course, which are sure to improve your speaking and writing scores and make you feel prepared and confident on test day. If you are struggling to prepare for the TOEFL test, cannot find the right resources, keep running out of time on the reading section, or stay silent during the 45-second speaking response because your mind goes blank every time you see the timer, click on the link in the description. We'll fix all that and help you score 100 and higher and achieve your dreams. Tip number 4, pick the right time and place to study. Avoid studying when you're too tired, especially at night. You'll only waste time and not improve. Instead, find a time in the morning or afternoon when you can concentrate better. 10 minutes of focused practice is much more beneficial than an hour of idling around the questions. For example, what I usually do with my students during our consultations is take a list of type 1 questions and then practice them for about 10 minutes. At first, I ask them to come up with opening sentences for 15 to 20 questions in a row until the skill becomes automatic and they no longer think about it. You should also practice answering questions in a noisy environment, since this is what you might experience on test day. Of course, you can practice in a quiet room first, but then play some music in the background or turn on a podcast to distract yourself. On test day, you may hear other students talking, so it's better to be prepared for a noisy environment ahead of time. Tip number 5, use a timer. Practice under time pressure to get used to the test conditions. It may sound obvious, and it probably does, but you should embrace the timer as your ally. There are students who are afraid of time, so when they see the minutes ticking away, they panic and cannot say a word. You can try speaking without the timer first, and then slowly incorporate it into your practice routine. Look at the clock at least twice during your answer to stay on track. For example, in questions 2 and 3, if you see that you have 40 seconds left, you should move on to the listening summary. Tip number 6, expand your vocabulary. Don't stick to the same set of words. Include a variety of vocabulary to showcase your language skills. A diverse vocabulary not only impresses graders, but also adds depth and richness to your responses. This doesn't mean that you need to stuff your answers with low-frequency academic words that no one uses except in academic articles. Use thematic and idiomatic vocabulary. In our TOEFL course, we have compiled a list of such words on various topics, so you don't have to find them on your own. If you choose to prepare on your own, research topics such as science, study, work, entertainment, environment, and come up with 10 to 15 word lists for each topic. Tip number 7, practice, practice, practice. You know what they say, practice makes perfect. Record yourself responding to various TOEFL prompts. Play them back identify areas for improvement, and fine-tune your responses. The more you practice, the more comfortable and fluent you'll become. And hey, it's a great way to track your progress. I like to give my students raw scores for each answer they give because it motivates them to keep going. Start with question type 1, then move on to question type 2, and so on. You can also do complete speaking sections on YouTube to simulate the test conditions. Tip number 8, get professional support. Consider seeking guidance from experienced teachers. Whether it's a TOEFL tutor or an English teacher, having someone to guide your studies can be immensely beneficial. You can take our Get 100 Plus on TOEFL course to improve your skills, or use any other professional support out there. The important thing is that you get feedback a little earlier than a few days before the test. If you schedule a consultation the day before the TOEFL test, you will not have time to implement the skills and feedback that you will receive. So allow at least a few days between your consultation and the test. These were my 8 TOEFL speaking tips to boost your confidence and raise your score. Remember, the TOEFL speaking section isn't just about speaking. It's about speaking strategically. We're going to break down the entire speaking section of the TOEFL test so that you can see for yourself all the do's and don'ts. We'll be using the ETS free sample test, which you can find in the description below. As always, I recommend that you pause the video after each question and try to answer the questions on your own before listening to my responses. This way, you will not only learn new information, but you will really practice and get one step closer to your dream score. If your TOEFL test is coming up and you want to get to your target score as quickly as possible, click on this link to get access to all the materials and resources you need. So, let's pretend that today is the day of your test and get started. As with all TOEFL sections, you will first see the instructions. Then, the first task. You will see a question and you will have 45 seconds to answer it. The important thing is that you only have 15 seconds to prepare. So don't panic and use this time to your advantage. Let's give it a try.
State whether you agree or disagree with the following statement. Then explain your reasons, using specific details in your explanation. Learning through online courses is more effective than learning in the traditional classroom setting.
I absolutely agree that online classes are much more beneficial for learning. First of all, studying online saves a lot of time on your daily commute. I remember when my friend used to take a TOEFL prep course in downtown LA, he had to waste a couple of hours a day getting there and back. However, if he had prepared for the test online, he would have been able to invest all that time in taking practice tests and studying on his own, which would have allowed him to get the score he needed much faster. Second, distance learning also allows you to take courses from anywhere in the world, regardless of your location. You can earn a certificate or even a degree from top American universities while living in Australia, for example, which definitely opens up new opportunities. This task is usually the hardest for my students for a couple of reasons. First, they start to panic during the prep time and can't say anything during the answer time. Give me a thumbs up in the comments if this is your problem. Second, some students make the first introductory statement too long. For example, they might say something like, I absolutely agree that learning through online classes is much more beneficial than learning in the traditional classroom setting. And there are a couple of reasons why I have this opinion. This makes them waste a lot of time, and they can't elaborate on their reasons and examples. Some don't use transitions, such as on top of that, however, as a result. Others pause too much and say something like, I agree that online courses are much more beneficial for 2 reasons. And most struggle to come up with relevant reasons and examples. As you can see, there is a lot going on in those 45 seconds, which is why I usually devote most of my time during our consultations to this type of question. Now, let's move on to the second part of the speaking section. The next 3 questions are called integrated speaking questions because you no longer have to think about what to say. You must read, listen, and then summarize what you read and heard. In question 2, you'll read a text about a change on campus, and then listen to 2 students discussing this change. Your task is to write down the main idea of the reading, what this change is about, and then listen carefully to one of the speakers in the conversation. This person will express their opinion about the change and give 2 reasons for this opinion. For example, I support this change because reason 1 and reason 2. Now, let's get down to business.
Read the article from a university newspaper. You will have 50 seconds to read the article. Begin reading now. Now listen to a conversation between 2 students.
Hey, Sue, did you see this article?
Yeah, I did. I don't think that's a very good idea.
Really? You don't think it's a safety hazard, like they said?
No, at least not during the day. I'm pretty sure both of those accidents happened at night when it's harder to see cyclists. They didn't say that in the article.
Oh, that does make a difference.
Sure it does. Maybe at night, with low visibility, there's a safety hazard. But I don't think there's any danger in the daytime, which is when most people need to move around and get to classes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Besides, it's such a big campus. If they do this, it's going to be really hard to get around.
Well, we can always take the bus, I guess.
But the buses only run once an hour.
That's true. They're not very convenient.
No, not at all. If people have to take the bus, we'll end up sitting around waiting for the next one all the time, and we're all too busy to waste our time doing that.
The woman expresses her opinion of the proposed policy change. State her opinion and explain the reasons she gives for holding that opinion.
In the announcement, the university shares its plans to soon ban the use of bicycles on campus, since they are a safety risk and because the free campus bus service is an alternative way to get around. The speaker disagrees with this policy. First, she points out that the accidents described in the article took place at night, when visibility is poor, and it's not easy to see cyclists. However, most students ride their bikes during the day, when this problem does not exist, so there is no safety threat. Second, she mentions that the campus area is large, and if students cannot use bicycles, commuting between campus buildings will be problematic. Also, the buses only run once an hour, which means that even if the bus service is introduced, it won't be as effective as riding a bicycle, because students will end up wasting too much time waiting for the next bus, and everyone is too busy for that. These are the reasons why the woman disagrees with the announcement. So, as you can see, you want to give a brief summary of the reading, and then spend most of your time on the listening summary. A quick tip from me is to use the 20-40 rule. Spend 20 seconds on the reading summary and transition, and then 40 seconds on the conversation summary. The biggest challenges with this type of question are not keeping to the time limit, saying too little about the listening summary, talking too much about the reading, making too many grammar and vocabulary mistakes that make your answer unclear, and again, pausing too much. Question 3. I call this question general to specific. Why is that? Because in this question, you should first read a general text on an academic topic, and then listen to a more specific lecture on the same topic. The lecture will usually explain the concept from the reading using examples, experiments, or the professor's experience. Then, as in question 2, you should summarize what you have heard and read. Let's look at this question.
Now read the passage from a psychology textbook. You have 45 seconds to read the passage. Begin reading now. Now listen to part of a lecture on the topic in a psychology class.
This happens all the time with kids in schools. Say there's a little boy or girl who's just starting school. Well, they're not really used to the rules about proper behavior for a classroom. So at the beginning they might, interrupt the teacher, walk around the classroom when they're supposed to be sitting down. Just misbehaving in general. Okay, but what happens? Well, the teacher gets angry with them when they act this way. They might get punished. They have to sit at their desks when everyone else is allowed to go outside and play. And they certainly don't like that. Soon, they'll learn that this kind of behavior gets them in trouble. They'll also learn that when they raise their hand to talk to the teacher and sit quietly and pay attention during class, they're rewarded. The teacher tells them she's proud of them and maybe puts little happy face stickers on their homework. Now that their behavior gets a good reaction from the teacher, the kids learn to always act this way in class and not behave the way they used to.
Using the example from the lecture, explain what behavior modification is and how it works.
The reading passage is about behavior modification, which is when we change the way we behave after learning about the consequences of our actions. The professor delves deeper into the subject by using the example of children just starting school. He says that at first, kids don't know how to behave in class and may interrupt the teacher, walk around the classroom, or misbehave in some other way. However, after seeing the teacher get angry with them and maybe even punish them for this sort of behavior, like making them sit at their desks while other children play outside, the little ones realize that bad behavior will result in negative consequences for them. On the contrary, when they behave well, such as raising their hands to speak or sitting quietly and paying attention in class, children are rewarded with praise from the teacher or happy face stickers on their homework, which motivates them to behave that way in class and avoid bad behavior. Well, how was that? As you can see, this question can be challenging for people who have trouble summarizing things quickly and effectively. A typical situation I see with my students is that a person starts talking and either does not include some relevant details or tries to say too much and runs out of time. A little tip from me: use complex and compound sentences. They always help to get the same message across, but in a much shorter and more concise way. If you feel this is a bit too challenging for you, don't worry. These questions may seem difficult at first, but with a little practice, you'll be able to crack them like nuts. If you want to learn the special formula for summarizing the lecture in a fast and effective way, join our TOEFL course. We'll practice each question of the speaking section separately, and make sure you ace the speaking section. Last but not least, question 4. For this question, you only have 20 seconds to prepare, and the same 60 seconds to speak as in question 3. This is because you don't have to read the text. You just listen to a lecture. It usually starts with the professor talking about some topic or issue, and then you will hear 2 examples that will illustrate this concept. For example, 2 types of mammals, or 2 marketing strategies. So your job is just to listen carefully, take notes, and then summarize. Let's give it a shot.
Listen to part of a lecture in a business class.
If a consumer has to choose between 2 products, what determines the choice? Assume that someone, a purchaser, is choosing between 2 products that cost the same, okay? If people have a choice between 2 identically priced products, which one will they choose? They choose the one they think is of higher quality, of course. But what does it mean for a product to be a high-quality product? Well, business analysts usually speak of 2 major factors of quality. One factor is reliability, and the other is what we call features. So reliability. What's reliability? Well, a product is reliable if it works the way we expect it to work, if it can go a reasonable amount of time without needing repairs. If a product, a car for example, doesn't work the way it should and needs repairs too soon, we say it's unreliable. So product reliability means basically the absence of defects or problems that you weren't expecting. It used to be that when people thought about product quality, they thought mainly about reliability. Today, it's different. People do still care about reliability, don't get me wrong. It's just that manufacturing standards are now so high that, we'll take cars for example, today. Today's cars are very reliable. So reliability is important, but it's not going to be the deciding factor. So if reliability isn't the deciding factor anymore, what is? Features. All those extras. The things a product has that aren't really necessary, but that make it easier to use or that make it cool. For example, new cars today are loaded with features like electric windows, sunroofs, air conditioning, stereos, and so forth. When people are comparing products today, they look at features because reliability is pretty much equal across the board. And that's why manufacturers include so many features in their products.
Using points and examples from the lecture, explain the two major factors of product quality and how their role in consumer decision-making has changed.
The lecture is about two major factors of quality, aspects that help customers choose between two similar products. The first factor is reliability, which is when the product works as we expect and lasts long enough without needing to be repaired. She gives an example of cars, saying that when you buy a new car, you want it to work the way it should and last a long time without breaking down. Otherwise, it's unreliable. Simply put, a reliable product doesn't have defects and works the way we expect it to. The second and deciding factor is features. Features are extra additions that aren't necessary but make the product easier to use or just cool. To illustrate, new cars come with many extra features, such as sunroofs, air conditioners, stereos, electric windows, and so on. For this reason, consumers look at features when deciding which product to buy. And so, manufacturers try to include as many features as possible in their products. The key to answering this question is to include details from the lecture. A little tip from me. If you hear a word that you recognize, but you aren't sure if you'll remember it when you speak, write it down. That way, you have a little list of words to guide you through your answer and help you speak fluently. Also, don't waste too much time in the beginning. Just introduce the general topic and talk about the two things in turn. In this video, we'll do an entire TOEFL speaking section together. Question 1. Independent speaking.
You will now give your opinion about a familiar topic. After you hear the question, you will have 15 seconds to prepare and 45 seconds to speak. Some people enjoy taking risks and trying new things. Others are not adventurous, they are cautious and prefer to avoid danger. Which behavior do you think is better? Explain why.
I believe people should take risks and try new things because it allows them to constantly grow and improve their lives. I remember back in college, I always said yes to all kinds of activities and events. For example, I would join different clubs and sports teams even though I had no prior experience, like playing soccer, fencing, and participating in theater productions. Nothing too risky, of course, but while I was a little nervous at first, it helped me discover new passions and improve my teamwork and communication skills. It also allowed me to build a diverse network of friends from all walks of life, many of whom I still keep in touch with today. This question is usually the hardest for most students because you should speak non-stop for 45 seconds and also think about what to say at the same time. I often see how students struggle with it during the consultations I give for our TOEFL prep course and in my one-on-one sessions. The truth is, it's not as hard as it seems. You should do a certain list of things that will help you answer this question effectively. And don't panic. In fact, this is my favorite part to explain during my consultations because I love to see people who have been struggling with their answers finally start to produce solid responses without pauses, which completely changes their scores. So first, drill the introductory sentence. That's the first sentence in your response, and you should be able to produce it like this for every question you come across. Then, give one reason for your opinion. You can give two if you're a fast speaker, but often having one clear reason is more than enough. Besides, this way you can elaborate on your point and provide more details. Which brings us to part 3. Drill examples. In fact, every example you give in the independent question is almost the same. You start by creating context. For example, I remember when I was a kid, I used to ... Then you add details. I'd come back from home and I'd do my homework and then ... And finally, you show some results. Why this example is relevant. For example, This allowed me to ace my exams and tin. So for this question, you should simply choose one of the two options. State your choice at the beginning and then give one reason why you think so, and finish with a detailed example. By the way, if you want to know the speaking and writing templates that make up half of your answers and allow you to boost your score from 22-23 to 25-27, click on the link below. By using these templates, you'll feel confident and relaxed on test day and know exactly what to say for each type of question. And because you're watching this video, there is a special promo code you can use. Now, question 2, campus announcement.
The university is making a change in the courses it will offer. First, read the article from the university newspaper about the change. Next, listen to a conversation on the same topic. You will then be asked a question about what you have read and heard. Now listen to two students discussing the article.
Everything all right?
Yeah, I'm just upset about that article I showed you this morning.
Why? What's the big deal?
Well, as an art major, I think it's a big loss for the department. The university's got it all wrong.
What do you mean?
Well, the low enrollment isn't because art majors don't want to take these classes. Problem is, who has time to take them when there are so many other requirements?
I don't understand.
You see, the classes they're eliminating are all optional. The required courses are mostly painting and drawing, and they take up all our time. What we really need are different requirements, then art majors could take a better variety of classes, all the things we're interested in.
That makes sense. But, the thing about the professor.
Well, that's true. But still, they're being drastic. If money's the problem, they could hire a part-time professor. Or, most of the professors in the department have secondary fields.
Really?
Yeah. At least a few painting teachers are also great sculptors. I'm sure one of them could teach a class.
The woman expresses her opinion of the university's plan. State her opinion and explain the reasons she gives for holding that opinion.
According to the announcement, the university's decision to eliminate the sculpture program is based on a lack of student interest, resulting in low enrollment, and the retirement of the only sculpture professor, which is a problem because of the department's limited budget. However, the speaker disagrees with this decision, since she believes it's a huge loss for the department. First, she says that the sculpture classes are all electives, and students are already overwhelmed with core courses like painting and drawing, so it's not like they are not interested in taking these classes. They simply don't have time. She also believes that changing the course requirements would allow art majors to take a wider range of classes. Secondly, the student says that if money is a problem, the university could hire a part-time professor or ask faculty who have secondary fields in sculpture to step in. She adds that some painting teachers are also great sculptors. This would solve the budget problem while keeping the program alive. For this question and all the other integrated speaking questions, think about your notes. In fact, there are 3 things you should be able to do to succeed in these tasks. 1. Understand the reading and listening material well. 2. Take and organize notes effectively. And 3, make sure you present the information logically. If you can do this, you'll definitely score at least a 3.5 out of 4 on all these questions. Note that you should paraphrase the information from the reading a bit and include lots of details from the listening. The listening part is more important, so try to spend at least 30 to 40 seconds talking about it. Moving on, question 3, general to specific.
Read a passage from a psychology textbook. Then, listen to the lecture that follows. Listen to part of a talk in a psychology class.
I think this will help you get a picture of what your textbook is describing. I had a friend who taught in the physics department, Professor Jones. He retired last year. Anyway, I remember, this was a few years ago. I remember passing by a classroom early one morning just as he was leaving, and he looked terrible. His clothes were all rumpled, and he looked like he hadn't slept all night. and I asked if he was okay. I was surprised when he said that he never felt better, that he was totally happy. He had spent the entire night in the classroom working on a mathematics puzzle. He didn't stop to eat dinner, he didn't stop to sleep, or even rest. He was that involved in solving the puzzle. And it didn't even have anything to do with his teaching or research. He had just come across this puzzle accidentally, I think in a mathematics journal, and it just really interested him. So he worked furiously all night and covered the blackboards in the classroom with equations and numbers, and never realized that time was passing by.
Explain flow and how the example used by the professor illustrates the concept.
The reading is about flow, which is when you are so immersed in an activity that challenges your physical and mental abilities that you lose track of time and feel deeply satisfied with what you are doing. The professor delves deeper into the subject by giving an example of his friend, Professor Jones, who used to teach in the physics department. He says that his friend once stayed up all night working on a math puzzle that he had stumbled upon and which had no connection to his research or classes. He adds that Jones was so excited to solve it that he worked hard all night, writing numbers and equations on the blackboards in the classroom, without stopping for dinner, sleep, or rest, completely forgetting the time. However, when the professor saw him the next morning, looking disheveled and terrible, his friend Jones said that he had never felt so happy. How was that? For this question, try to avoid pausing too much and using too many and so on. Does that mean you should talk like a robot? Not really. You can pause, but not too much. If you pause every 1 or 2 words, it will lower your delivery score. Also, don't repeat the same words too often. You don't want to say influence 3 to 5 times in your answer. Instead, think about how you can paraphrase or change the structure of your sentences. When practicing, it's always good to record yourself speaking, or even script your answers for the first few attempts to see if you have favorite filler words or words you keep repeating. But I think the main point here is to be able to give a lot of information in a short amount of time. So you'll need complex and compound sentences. Add sentences with which, when, if, so, while, and so on. This will make your life a lot easier. Question 4. Academic lecture.
You will listen to part of a lecture. You will then be asked a question about what you heard. Listen to part of a lecture in a biology course.
Human beings aren't the only animals that use tools. It's generally recognized that other animals use tools as well, use them naturally in the wild, without any human instruction. But when can we say that an object is a tool? Well, it depends on your definition of a tool. And in fact, there are 2 competing definitions, a narrow definition and a broad one. The narrow definition says that a tool is an object that's used to perform a specific task, but not just any object. To be a tool according to the narrow definition, the object's gotta be purposefully changed or shaped by the animal, or human, so that it can be used that way. It's an object that's made. Wild chimpanzees use sticks to dig insects out of their nests, but most sticks lying around won't do the job, they might be too thick, for example. So the sticks have to be sharpened so they'll fit into the hole in an ant hill or the insect nest. The chimp pulls off the leaves and chews the stick and trims it down that way until it's the right size. The chimp doesn't just find the stick. You could say it makes it in a way. But the broad definition says an object doesn't have to be modified to be considered a tool. The broad definition says a tool is any object that's used to perform a specific task. For example, an elephant will sometimes use a stick to scratch its back. It just picks up a stick from the ground and scratches its back with it. It doesn't modify the stick, it uses it just as it's found. And it's a tool under the broad definition, but under the narrow definition it's not, because, well, the elephant doesn't change it in any way.
Using points and examples from the talk, describe the 2 different definitions of tools given by the professor.
In the lecture, the professor discusses 2 competing definitions of tools that can be used both by animals and humans. The The first is the narrow definition. According to it, a tool is an object that has been intentionally modified or shaped to perform a task. She gives the example of wild chimpanzees who use sticks to get insects out of their nests. To do this, however, the chimps have to modify the sticks. They remove the leaves and chew the sticks so that they have the right size to fit into the insect nests. In this way, the chimpanzees adapt the object to their needs, which fits the narrow definition of a tool. The broad definition, on the other hand, is that a tool is any object that is used for a specific task without the need for modification. An example given in the lecture is that of elephants using sticks to scratch their backs. The elephants simply pick up a stick from the ground and use it without making any changes to it. So under the broad definition, even though it's not modified in any way, it's still a tool. This is the second most difficult question on the TOEFL speaking test. The main challenge here is to understand the information well and not get overwhelmed by the number of details. I know the first time you hear a lecture like this, you think, oh my god, how am I supposed to write all this down? Well, don't try to write down too much. What you should do instead is write down words that will guide you through your answer. You should also organize your notes clearly. For example, tools, used by animals, humans, 2 definitions, 1 narrow definition, this is the first definition. Then we explain it. Intentionally modified, shaped, animal, human, perform specific task, wild chimpanzees, use sticks, dig insects, nests, modify sticks, remove leaves, chew, right size. Having these notes would help you answer the question without getting lost. But the most important thing is to understand the main idea. That way, even if you don't remember all the details, you'll still be able to summarize the lecture well. This was the speaking section of the TOEFL. I will share with you the ultimate top 10 tips that will help you get a high score on the TOEFL writing section. Let's get started. Tip number 1. Know your question types and scoring rubrics. The TOEFL writing section has 2 tasks, the integrated task and the academic discussion task. The integrated task involves reading an article, listening to a lecture on the same topic, and then summarizing the information you learn from both sources. The academic discussion task is all about your thoughts. You must answer a question posed by a professor and write at least 100 words in 10 minutes, expressing your opinion on the topic. In the integrated assignment, you should select the most important information from the lecture and present it coherently and accurately in relation to the relevant information from the reading. This means that you should first write a little more about what you heard than what you read. Second, organize your response well and make it easy to understand. And third, make sure that your language mistakes don't distract the reader. In the writing for an academic discussion task, you should make a relevant and very clearly expressed contribution to the online discussion that demonstrates consistent facility with language. This means that first, your response should be at least 150 words long, preferably 170, to ensure that you develop your ideas well. Second, you must use details and examples. Third, your grammar and vocabulary should be natural and varied. And then fourth, you should proofread your essay well to avoid grammar and vocabulary mistakes. If you want to learn advanced vocabulary for the TOEFL writing section, get our PDF by clicking on the link in the video description. This brings us to the second tip. Tip number 2, learn to spot your mistakes. This is especially important for the academic discussion task. The scoring rubrics tell us that you should make almost no lexical or grammatical errors other than those expected of a competent writer, writing under time pressure. As examples, they give common typos or common misspellings or substitutions, such as there and there. So, to avoid mistakes, unleash your inner grammar ninja and proofread carefully. I recommend that you proofread your essays 3 times. The first time, check for content and clarity. Make sure you answered the question, provided enough detail, and didn't go off topic. The second time, check for grammar. Look for those sneaky grammar errors, such as articles, tenses, punctuation, and prepositions. Finally, Reread your essay to see if you need to make any vocabulary corrections. Of course, time is limited on test day, so you should learn to do this very quickly. To improve this skill, use proofreading tests and quizzes. There are tons of them on the internet. You can use the ones offered by Edit Republic, the Chartered Institute of Editing and Proofreading, or Grammar Monster. I will include the link to many free proofreading tests in the description below. This is a definite game changer. Like I said, time management is key. So, tip number 3 is stick to the clock. You may be able to write 30 out of 30 essays if you're preparing at home without a time limit. But if you only have 10 or 20 minutes to write something, everything changes. So, pace yourself and plan your time carefully. Spend a few minutes thinking about what you're going to write. Then write non-stop for some time. And spend the rest of the time proofreading what you've written. Proofreading is always easier than writing from scratch. So start writing as soon as you outline your essay and make corrections as necessary. Tip number 4, improve your typing skills. You can practice on the Fast Fingers website, which will also improve your spelling. This is especially important since there will be no grammar checkers on the day of the test, and you'll want to be prepared. Tip number 5, practice until your writing skills become automatic. Writing is a skill, and like any skill, it gets better with practice. Set aside some time each day to write essays. Use the official TOEFL prompts, time yourself, and review your work. The more you practice, the more confident you'll be on test day. You also want to reach a level where you don't have to think about grammar and vocabulary. If a grammar topic is challenging for you, review it until it becomes automatic. You can use grammar books or websites to practice grammar. In our TOEFL prep course, we have an entire lecture dedicated to the most common grammar mistakes students make. It's a compilation of all the little mistakes I've seen in my one-on-one sessions so far that are repeated in every single student's essay. If you want to get a high score on the TOEFL test and your time is limited, click on the link below and join our TOEFL community. For those who choose the Pro package, be sure to prepare your essays before the consultation so that we can score them along with your speaking. Tip number 6, learn collocations, not individual words. Part of the writing criteria is that you demonstrate precise and idiomatic word choice. Writing effectively and naturally depends on your ability to write in chunks. Imagine that you need to use the verb to address in your essay. Are you likely to use it correctly if you only know its definition? Maybe yes, maybe no. But if you know collocations, like to address the problem or to address the issue, you'll have a better chance of using them naturally. For example, the government is implementing new policies to address the problem of pollution in urban areas. Feel free to use the SCAL language learning engine, which provides sample sentences, a word chart with common collocations, and synonyms for any word or phrase you'd like to learn. Tip number 7, don't be afraid to make grammar mistakes. Yes, I know I just said that grammar is important and that you should learn to spot grammar errors in your essays, but that shouldn't be your main focus. In my one-on-one sessions, I see many students who only think about grammar accuracy and forget or don't have time to think about anything else. You should know that even though the ETS says that you should have almost no lexical or grammatical errors in your essays, the maximum score sample essays they provide us with have quite a lot of errors. When I was preparing updated lectures on the new writing test for our TOEFL course, I checked the ETS sample essays. And I have to tell you that there were more than 5 mistakes in each short essay. We analyze all of them in our writing module. For the integrated essays, grammar mistakes are even less important. This assignment is about showing that you can read, listen, and summarize academic information effectively. So yes, you should try to eliminate errors from your essays. But you should also know that it's okay to make some, especially if you're writing quickly. Don't just focus on grammar. Think about vocabulary. and most importantly, the content of your essays. Tip number 8, use templates. As with the speaking section, your writing will be much easier if you use templates. For example, the template for the integrated essay in our TOEFL course is 119 words long. If your essay is 200 words, that's about 60% of your essay. If you write 250 words, the template will be 47% of the essay, which is still about half. It also gives you the structure, so you don't have to worry about the order of the information. All you need to do to write a successful integrated essay is to follow the template and take effective notes while listening to the lecture. Tip number 9, don't write a conclusion. This is another important thing to keep in mind. Many students think that they need to have a conclusion. However, you don't need a conclusion in the integrated essay or in the writing for the academic discussion assignment. You should spend this time proofreading your essay more carefully. Finally, tip number 10, expand your vocabulary by paraphrasing. As you've seen, your vocabulary is crucial to scoring well on the TOEFL writing section. One of the ways to improve it and learn more synonyms for advanced vocabulary is to paraphrase texts. Simply take a portion of an article on the topic you are struggling with and rewrite it using synonyms and paraphrasing. My students and I jokingly call this technique an anti-plagiarism exercise. If you're writing a paper in college and use some ideas from outside sources, you must paraphrase the information from those sources to avoid losing points for plagiarism. Just do this for about 10 minutes every day and you'll see great improvements. It will also help you expand your topic-specific vocabulary. In this lesson, we are going to discuss 18 essential linking words for acing the TOEFL writing section. Now, what are linking words? These are words or phrases that act as bridges between sentences or paragraphs. For example, and, but, so, unless, even if, and so on. They help connect ideas smoothly and make your writing or speaking easier to understand. As I just mentioned, you don't have to force linking words into your sentences. However, if you do use one, make sure you add the word you know well. And that was just the first example of a perfect linking word for the writing section. So, number 1 is however. It means even so or on the other hand, and is often used to introduce a complication, contrast, or contradiction. You can start a sentence with however, as I did, or you can use it to create compound sentences by connecting two contrasting ideas. For example, he studied hard, however, he failed the exam. The movie got rave reviews, however, I found it disappointing. Another example, however, it's important to recognize the challenges associated with integrating technology into education. I love to use this linking word in integrated essays because it's so good and universal and allows you to contrast the reading passage and the lecture. When you include the lecturer's opinion, you can write, the lecturer, however, disagrees and says that. For example, intelligence has nothing to do with star navigation. If I'm writing a post about the negative aspects of smartphones, I might write something like this. In today's fast-paced society, technological advances have revolutionized various aspects of human life, increasing convenience and connectivity. Smartphones, for example, have become ubiquitous tools for communication and access to information. However, while these innovations offer numerous benefits, they also present challenges that society must address. For those who don't know, the word ubiquitous means everywhere. If you see this word for the first time, feel free to check out my video on advanced vocabulary for TOEFL, or download our free PDF with 100 of the most common advanced words you may need for the TOEFL test. The link is in the description. As you can see, the use of however in this paragraph helps to move the discussion from the positive aspects of smartphones to the potential drawbacks, creating a balanced and nuanced argument. You can also see that we use for example in this post. Which brings us to the next two words. For example and for instance. We use these words to give examples. Many students try to replace these linkers with less common alternatives, such as to exemplify, to illustrate, namely, and so on. I wouldn't recommend this. First, you might use them incorrectly and lose points. Second, they're a bit too formal for the kind of writing we do on the TOEFL test. You can start a sentence with for example or for instance, or use them in the middle of a sentence. Many countries have begun to address the problem of pollution. For example, Singapore has implemented strict regulations and promoted public transportation, or many countries have introduced strict regulations to reduce air pollution. For instance, China has imposed limits on industrial emissions and promoted the use of electric vehicles. We can also use the linking words like or such as to give examples. Through platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, people can keep in touch with friends and family, share updates about their lives, and engage in meaningful conversations. Let's look at another example from one of the integrated essays. Most of these materials, such as building materials, sand, stones, and even construction tools, are not what you would expect from ceremonies. If you want to add information that supports what you've already said, use moreover or in addition. For example, let's say I'm discussing the benefits of technology in education. As I write about it, I can use moreover or in addition to add new points. Online courses and educational platforms give students from all backgrounds access to high-quality learning materials and instruction. In addition, digital resources such as ebooks, educational applications, and online tutorials provide supplemental support for students, allowing them to deepen their understanding of complex concepts at their own pace. Or, in addition, technology has transformed the classroom environment, making learning more interactive and engaging. I could go on and on about the benefits and add, moreover, technology has empowered educators to personalize learning experiences to meet the needs of individual students. Another thing we often need when writing is to show the result or consequence of something. In this case, you can use as a result and therefore. The reason I love them is that they are versatile and can be used in a variety of contexts to show causality or logical consequence. The company implemented cost-cutting measures, and as a result, several employees were laid off. Learning to do household chores prepares young people for their future lives as adults. Therefore, those who were taught to do housework as children will find it easier to transition to independent life when they start living on their own. The next few words are although, while, and even though. These subordinate conjunctions allow us to create complex sentences that are so helpful in the writing section, especially when you need to say a lot of things in a short and concise way. We use these conjunctions to introduce a subordinate clause that contains a statement that contrasts with the main clause statement. My absolute favorite of these three is while, because it's so universal and easy to use in both writing and speaking. Let's look at some examples. An example from an integrated essay. While the reading argues that humpback whales navigate by the stars, the lecturer finds this theory unconvincing. Here, we have while at the beginning of the sentence. We can also put it in the middle of the sentence. The reading argues that humpback whales navigate by the stars, while the lecturer finds this theory unconvincing. A few more examples. Even though she was exhausted, she stayed up late to finish her project. Although he had prepared well for the presentation, he felt nervous when he got up in front of the audience. Although some argue that young people should live with their families as long as possible, I believe that it's more beneficial for them to live independently. The other two linking words we can use to introduce contrasting or opposing ideas are in contrast and on the other hand. I often use them in the integrated essay, where you have to contrast the lecture with the text. You can always write, on the other hand, the lecturer states that, or in contrast, the lecturer's position is that, and give their opinion. Last but not least are the linking words but, so, also, and. Even though you know them well and think they're too basic, I'd say they're the most important linking words out there, so don't forget to use them in your essays. For example, she wanted to travel abroad, but she couldn't afford the plane tickets, so she was forced to stay at home. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I wish you all the best of luck, and remember, you're more ready than you think.